Hello again, everyone. In this episode, we're going to talk about an integral, holistic approach to depression. Because as I spoke about in my last episode, I find our current approach and understanding of depression to be very sort of partial and simplified and ineffective, basically. And we don't get to the cause of things, and we don't really help people overcome depression in a sustainable way. And we don't give them the tools they need to improve their mental health and sustain high quality mental health for the rest of their life. So in this episode, I want to give my suggestions as to what an integral, holistic and effective approach to depression looks like.
This is a Deep Psychology podcast. I'm your host, Ross Edwards, writer, meditation teacher, founder of deep-psychology.com, and avid lover of all things psychological. In listening to this podcast, you're part of the worldwide deep psychology community of tens of thousands of people undertaking profound personal transformation. You can join us on any of the major podcasting platforms, and make sure to visit the site deep-psychology.com for lots of high quality resources. Let's get started.
So before we get going here, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to the previous episode that I published last week called My Depression Experience and Health System Anger, because in that episode I really talk about the foundation of my sort of views on depression, my experience of having depression, my experience of being a mental health patient in the health system, specifically in the UK. And without that, I think you may misunderstand things or not fully understand the things that I say in this episode. So I'd really encourage you to listen to that. It's fairly long, but it's very detailed, and there go into a lot of the arguments against sort of our current way of looking at depression and why I'm pissed off at the current view we have and the current methodology we use, and so on. So have a listen to that. But today, I'm really going to, as I said last week, I sort of criticised a lot last week, and I was sort of moaning, and I maybe sounded a bit hurt and a bit like I was doing a therapy session on myself, which is fine, but I don't want to just moan. I'm not the kind of person to sort of moan about the world and then, just go about my life totally contradicting the things that I say and the things that I think need to be improved. I like to, or I hope that this is how I live my life. It's easy to say it, but I try to live in accordance with my values. And when I speak out against something, I really try to actually do something. I don't just moan for the sake of moaning. I moan because I realize there's a problem in like a human system or in the way we do things. And then I change my life so that I live in accordance with that. I'm not perfect. Of course I'm not perfect, but as a general principle, that's what I try to do. I don't want to just moan. I want to actually live my life in a way that solves the issues that we might be moaning about. Anyway, that was just a little bit of an insight into how I live my life. But what's this got to do with depression? Well, basically, as I said, last week there was a lot of moaning and a lot of complaining. But I don't want to just be empty moaning and complaining. I want to discuss the things I've learned in managing my own mental health, which is something I've sort of taken as a responsibility in the last 10 years of my life, since I had a severe depressive episode. And I want to ultimately talk about sort of the latest strategies and methodologies and findings and theories and ideas around depression, and not just in sort of an idealistic way. Wouldn't it have been amazing if we could all be happy 100% 24/7 and no one would ever suffer depression? I don't want to be too idealistic here. I want to show you the practical stuff that you can do as an individual, and perhaps that is starting to seep into the health system that would compose a much more holistic strategy and perspective and methodology for depression. So that's sort of just a very brief summary of what we're going to do today. And to be honest, it's interesting because I know roughly what I'm going to talk about, but also a lot of this is just based on my experience as a meditator, as a meditation teacher, writing articles about psychology for a living, spending hours and hours studying this stuff on my own. It's just stuff that's going to be coming out, and I'm just going to be pulling in a lot of different factors from here, there, and everywhere. And I think that's a nice bridge, actually. That's a nice bridge to the actual core of the message here. From that little introduction to the core, that's a nice little bridge. The idea of pulling in as many factors as possible. And I think that's, when we're talking about health, we need to pull in as many factors as possible. As I was moaning about last week, one of the things that really annoys me about our current perspective on depression, particularly the causes, which then feeds into our idea of how we need to attempt to cure people or help people get over their depression, is that first of all, we think it's a genetic thing, right? So and this is like, I want you to sort of think about people around you. I don't see things like this, but I know lots of people who do. And it's like very strange to me. I'm just going to give you an example, right? There's someone in my extended family, shall we say, not blood, not, we don't have the same blood, we're not like from the same parents or anything, but part of my extended family, who recently had a serious heart problem and needed a serious operation to cure it, to resolve the issues. And it was funny because when I was talking about this, my perspective was very different from the people that I'm close to in my family, of this extended family member's problem. My perspective was very different. They just seemed to like, their explanation was genetic. It was like, their dad has this issue, and his brother has had that similar issue. As though it was like, because it was there in the family, it was guaranteed that was going to happen. Last week I talked about the problems with genetic explanations for these things. There are so many issues. Even if you say, right, genetics is a factor, there are so many issues that this simplistic sort of, it's a genetics problem. It's just so oversimplified. There's so many problems with it. And I just do not agree with it whatsoever. That's one of the issues with our current understanding of mental health, is we often think of it as a genetic problem. And listen, it could be a factor, right? I bet there's plenty of evidence out there, in all the best scientific journals. I bet there's plenty of evidence because we've researched genetics to high heaven. I bet there's research out there if you want to find it. And that's fine. Listen, if it is a factor, I'm open to considering that as a factor, right? And I'm not saying I'm an absolute master of all the factors of depression, which is why I don't want to simplify, because I realise that I'm not an expert. Or I realise there's way more to know than I currently know. Anyway, the problem with the genetics explanation is that it doesn't make room for lifestyle factors, right? As soon as you say something is a genetic issue, what it does is it creates it basically in your mind you're painting it as a certainty. My dad had depression when he was my age, or my mum had depression when she was my age, or my grandma, or whatever. As soon as you say that, it puts you in this kind of victim mindset. It puts you in this sort of the mindset of, this was inevitable because my mum and dad had it at some point, or whatever it is, whoever it is in your family had suffered depression. As soon as you say that, you're for one thing, you're becoming sort of a victim of it, and for another thing, you're giving away your power. and you're not realizing the power that you have to take charge of your mental health. And as soon as you do that, well, it cuts off a lot of avenues for you, like so many that we're going to talk about. One of the avenues we're going to talk about here is pretty much impossible if you think that it's a genetic destiny thing, right? You also start to see, basically, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is so studied and so well understood, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Anything you believe about yourself or about life, it tends to just, your experiences and the way you view things and the way you interpret what happens in your life tends to just reinforce your beliefs, right? So if you believe, oh, well, it's a genetic destiny, subtly you're going to believe that you're going to have depression at some point inevitably, which really isn't inevitable at all. And then subtly, very subtly, if you really believe that, you're going to start acting according to how you think a depressed person should act. And lo and behold, if you do that for enough time, years, months, years, and your psychology begins to reflect the psychology of a depressed person, which is something we're also going to talk about, of course. Well, listen, you are depressed at that point. You probably could get diagnosed with depression because you are depressed. But what you're not seeing is your belief that you had to be depressed was probably the contributing factor. It's nothing to do with genetics. And as I said, listen, I'm open to genetics being a pure explanation, but those are just two of the problems with it. There's so many problems with the genetic explanation. I could do an entire presentation on this. I could do lots of episodes on this, but yeah, I don't like it, and I don't buy it. I do not like when people say I can't or I won't, or they give like a very definite, I'm going to be depressed because it was my genetic destiny. I'm never going to speak another language because it was my genetic destiny. All of this stuff, I just do not agree with it at all. And so many times I've seen that it's very wrong, both in my personal life, in others' lives, and in people that I've worked with. So that's one of the things I don't like about our current understanding of depression, but we've got to maybe include, is there genetic evidence? Right, let's include that, right? Let's say there's genetic evidence, right? Let's include that in our consideration. It might mean that for a particular person, they've got a strong family history. We might need to take that into account. It might not be because of genetics, by the way, but we have to take that into account, right? The other explanation I do not like very much is a neurological explanation. I was actually watching, what film was it now? The film Captain Fantastic. If you've not seen Captain Fantastic, it's a good film. It's basically about a sort of hippie guy that raises his children in the mountains in America. And there's a lot more to it than that, but it's an interesting story. He basically teaches all his children. He's a very sort of intellectual guy. He knows different languages. He reads lots of books. He knows a lot about all sorts of subjects. And at one point in the film, and I really remember this, he's describing the illness his wife has. I'm not going to try not to give the film away, but basically he talks about how she's got a depressive issue. Or that is the issue she has. She's got like very strong mood swings. She has depressive episodes, very strong depressive episodes. And he says his explanation for it was basically on the lines of she lacks a certain neurotransmitter, which means that basically, her neurochemistry is altered, therefore this is why she experiences depressive episodes. And listen, that is like one of our go-to explanations for depression, as I talked about last week. We talk about it as a neurological deficiency. But, as I said last week, and I'm kind of joking when I say this, like, I don't know, it's sort of a funny metaphor that came to mind, but I'm actually not joking. Like, when I think about it, I actually agree with myself, and I realise it's actually a very good analogy. Saying that you are depressed because you have a neurological deficiency is very similar to saying that a fat person is fat because they have lots of fat in their body. It's like, well, no shit. You know, you're depressed, you've got a neurological deficiency, right? You're fat, you've got lots of fat in your body, right? But that doesn't explain anything. That doesn't explain why you have a neurological deficiency. That doesn't explain all the behavioral, social, psychological, etc., factors that create deficiency in our neurology and so on. And listen, I'm not a neuroscientist, right? So I'm not going to start giving you all the technical details, which I don't know because I don't. But stepping back for a minute, how does that help us with the issue? Because listen, in my own case, right? Well, listen, let me say something before I go into my own case, right? It's very similar to the genetic explanation. It's kind of like, it's a very sort of dismissive explanation. It's kind of like, oh, I've got a neurological deficiency. And because of the way we understand our brain, and our brain is wired, quote unquote, wired, and it's programmed, quote unquote, programmed, you start to believe that I have a neurological deficiency now, therefore I've always had it, therefore I will always have it. That is the belief that is created. And it creates the same victim attitude, and it creates the same sort of feeling of helplessness. It's kind of like, oh, well, I've got a neurological deficiency. How on earth am I supposed to solve that issue, right? It doesn't empower the patient at all. And listen, I'm going to get on to my own case in a minute, because this is pretty much how I look at my own case. When you look at a depressed person, and again, I've not seen the research, but I trust that when you look at a depressed person, you measure the neurological chemicals, whatever the chemicals associated with mood and so on, you will see an imbalance, right? I agree with that. I can feasibly understand that is true, right? Even if I've not seen the research, I trust that is true, because it's an accepted explanation, and it seems to have a lot of basis behind it. What I am questioning is, and let me now talk about my own case, I bet you, if at the point that I was diagnosed with depression in 2014, again, please, I'm not going to go into this all again, please go back and listen to last week's episode. If you had measured my neurological, my neurochemistry at that point, you would have seen an imbalance in, neurotransmitters and all the rest of it. You would have seen an imbalance there, because I was in a pretty dark place. Now, what is the issue? We cannot call that a cause. We cannot cause a neurochemical problem. We cannot say that as a cause. I'm sure that in some cases it might actually be a cause, like the cause. However, what I think this is, more than anything, is it's like saying you're fat because you've got lots of fat in your body. You've got more fat than the average person. It's the same kind of thing. It's not a cause, it's an indicator. If you went to a dietitian and they said, you're fat because you've got lots of fat in your body, you would just you'd be startled, you'd be stunned at how stupid an explanation that is. It doesn't make any sense, because they've not asked you about your diet, they've not asked you about your exercise habits, they've not asked you about, how much time do you spend sitting down all day. They've not asked you about your past and your friends and the place you live, and whether there's a lot of availability of like fast food, and how much money you have. If you've got low income, you're probably more likely to buy cheap food, which is usually not very high quality, and so on and so on and so on. Imagine the dietitian didn't ask you any of that. They just said, oh, you're fat because you've got lots of fat in your body, so we're going to suck all the fat out of you. Well, listen, I don't know about you. I'd be very I'd probably just get up and leave. I'd just be like, you don't know what you're talking about, so thanks very much. In my opinion, right, that's the same thing that we're doing with depression. We're basically saying you've got a neurochemical imbalance. So let me give you, medicine to pump more serotonin into your brain. But that is not the problem. That is not the cause of the issue. In my case, that was not the cause of the issue. There were many causes to my depression, and none of them were neurological imbalance. That wasn't the cause. That was an indicator. That was like the neurological correlate. That was like the biological correlate of everything else that was going on in my life. So those two explanations, we don't want to throw them out. We don't want to say, oh, well, genetics and neurology are not important. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when we take them to be the cause, it's just there's so much wrong with it that, again, I don't want to go into all of this right now, but let me just say, what I think, if we're working with people with depression, I just want to say right now, I'm not a qualified mental health professional. If you have a mental health issue, please go and see a qualified professional. Please do. If we're treating depression, we need to have a very holistic understanding of the person. That sounds very cliche, but it's very obvious. It's like the being fat example. It's like you cannot just give a simplistic explanation. You really need to look at the entire person's life, everything, as much as you possibly can. And then you need to develop methodologies that skillfully address all of the things that they're doing in their life, or the situation that they're in, or the context they're in, the socio-cultural, the socio-political context that they're in. You have to look at all these things, and you have to give them strategies for how to manage them, right? That's what really needs to happen. And so I'm not here to give a list, a prescriptive list. I'm here to offer a few suggestions, but really anything that could be a factor, we want to take it into account as a possible factor, right? And when I start to think about all the possible factors, it's really endless, but I'm going to try and go quite broad and cover a lot at the same time. I guess one thing we need to look at is the person's life situation, right? We need to look at, do they have friends? Do they have family? What are their relationships like with their friends and family? Do they have close friends? Do they have family members that they feel loved? Do they have traumatic relationships with their family members? Do they have bad history with their family members? Do they spend a lot of time alone? Or, do they go into their workplace? Do they have a job? If not, what do they do with their lives? What are their hobbies like? What sort of hobbies do they have? Do they sit and watch TV all day? What do they do at the weekend? Do they just sit in their house and do nothing? Or, what is it exactly? Those very basic factors. Where do they live? Is it the place they live? Is that maybe a thing? Like maybe if they live in an isolated place, they might feel very lonely. And it sounds so simple, but, well, it could be an enormous factor. Just very basic lifestyle factors like that. We really need to look at those. As ordinary people, when we think about our lives and we think about, why are we happy and why are things going well for us or otherwise, often the explanations we give are to do with these very basic things, with our friends, our family, the job we have, our social life, just very basic things. We're not talking about our neurochemistry. We're not talking about our genetics, right? We're talking about our everyday experiences, right? And if someone is lonely, if someone has no family, someone has no friends, so they live in the middle of nowhere, they don't have a job, or they have a job but they work from home, they don't do anything at the weekend, they don't do anything with their spare time, they sit and watch TV, or whatever it is, just that very basic setup right there is, that to me, that is a recipe for depression. Because, well, for so many reasons, right? Because you're not meeting your social needs, right? You're not meeting your needs to have profound connections with people, which is a recipe for loneliness. You are if you have depressive tendencies already, you're much more likely to perpetuate those tendencies if you're on your own all the time, because basically you're just going to be, and there's a lot of good evidence for this, by the way, I've studied this, you're basically going to churn over all your problems in your head. You're not going to be out there enjoying life, soaking it in, even if you've got problems in your life. You go out there and you do stuff and you enjoy, right? You're going to be at home churning your problems over day after day after day. And what good is that going to do? It's a recipe for depression. We need to look at very basic lifestyle factors like that. Very simple, almost simplistic, but this is one thing that just drives me crazy. No one in the entire mental health system, the whole time I came into contact with the mental health system, the NHS, as someone who was diagnosed with depression and given medicine and given therapy and had to be in hospital for a little bit because of something. At no point did no one even ask me about these things. No one asked me. And it was just like, now looking back, it's so obvious that part of my issue was like these very basic things. We're going to get to other basic things we need to take into account. I'd just been broken up with by someone that I was very attached to. Such a simple factor, but oh my God, no one, it's startling. It just leaves me speechless. I feel angry and I feel like, when someone's doing something so stupid that you just don't know how to explain to them that it's stupid and they should stop doing it. This is how I feel right now. It's just like, no, like what, how could you not realize that was an issue? And why did no one ask me, right? We need to look at those very basic things. Other basic things, speaking of which, but, you could think of these things as like the 80-20 rule. The small 20% of factors that make up 80% of our happiness in life, perhaps. I don't know, I'm just saying. Two other basic areas, diet and exercise. Diet and exercise. What is your diet like? Are you eating salt, sugar, fat? Are you getting your vitamins? I should have said, do you lack vitamins? Are you malnourished? Are you lacking protein? Are you lacking carbohydrates? Are you lacking fruit and veg? Are you eating just like processed meat and processed food and everything from a packet? I mean, listen, that has to be a factor. It has to be a factor in our mood, in how we feel. Like, it yourself, when you eat crap food, you tend to feel worse. You tend to feel listless. You tend to feel like isolating yourself. You don't want to do anything. That is in a small case, not in an extreme case, in as an isolated thing that you do for a short period of time, it's probably not going to have I don't know, I'm just sort of using my intuition here. As I said, I've not researched all of this like to the nth degree, but just thinking on a very basic level here, we know that when you eat worse, you feel worse. I'm not saying you feel depressed, but you feel worse, and you stop doing things that you would otherwise do because you just don't have the energy, right? Same thing goes with exercise. Exercise has a very, very clear biopsychological signature. It releases chemicals in our brain, the happiness chemicals, etc., to the point that it can actually become addictive, right? But the exercise keeps us active. It gets us to go beyond our limits. It makes you feel happy. It refreshes you. It keeps your body healthy. I mean, come on. That is a factor. Of course it's a factor. Picture someone who eats very well, not all else being equal. Picture someone in your mind who eats very well and does a lot of exercise, right? Picture that person, just like a stereotypical person, right? And then picture someone who eats terrible and doesn't do any exercise, has not done any exercise for years. Picture the two. Who is happier? I'll guarantee the person that does exercise and diet in your own mind is happier. I guarantee it. If they're not, well, I don't know what to say. A doctor friend of mine actually said to me, and they're a doctor. They've been through all the, they've read all the studies, they've been working with people, they've given all the medicine out. They said to me, you can do a lot for yourself just by doing diet and exercise, by having strong diet and exercise habits. End of story. I don't need to look at the scientific studies to know that. So those basic factors, right? I mean, I'm talking about holistic understanding. This isn't holistic understanding. This is just common sense. It's common sense approach to treating people. And again, I'm going to moan again about my own experience, but literally nobody, and I'll include alcohol in my diet and exercise, because alcohol is oh my God, it is, man, I don't know what to say. No one talk about my alcohol habits, which were both a result of and, in my mind, a cause of my depression. No one spoke about my diet with me, and no one spoke about those other basic factors I was talking about: my family, my friends, the area I live in, blah, 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 blah. What I do at the weekend, what hobbies do I have, which were mostly watching TV at the time, I have to be honest, and going out partying. It's common sense stuff that we need to take very seriously here. It's not neurological imbalance. It is the daily habits we have. It is our life moment to moment and all the factors involved in that. That's, to me, what we need to pay attention to. Another very important factor, which is a little bit more difficult to understand, but one that has, a deeper understanding of this has basically created a new method for treating depression, which is as effective as medication. So, and it has nothing to do with medication, by the way, nothing. It has nothing to do really with the fundamental perspective that our medication or medication obsession has or is based on. And what is that? Psychology. It is our psychology. Our psychology plays an enormous role in depression. An enormous role. And just by understanding, well, let me not give it away, but by having the methodologies and tools you need to look at this specific aspect of your psychology, you have a method that is as powerful as medication for treating depression, right? So what is this? Well, basically, there are certain psychological patterns that have been observed in people who have a history of depression. Those are that slight emotional triggers in their life causes spirals of negative thinking that are much more pronounced than those of the average person, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is that people with repeated bouts of depression become ever more vulnerable because basically their thinking becomes more and more negative. Their self-talk, which we've talked about February and March on the podcast, you can go and look for my episodes on self-talk, and we talk about meditation. We talk about this solution to this particular aspect of depression. What was I saying? I can't remember what I was saying. Their thinking becomes conditioned to be negative, very negative. So this is one of the things that cognitive therapy has attempted to treat, and in general has treated pretty well. Cognitive therapy, as I understand it, isn't the most effective, but it's an effective treatment, right? In cognitive therapy, basically what you do is, and this isn't the solution I'm talking about, my solution involves cognitive therapy, but it also involves meditation. We're going to get there. In cognitive therapy, what you do is you basically pay very close attention to the thoughts that are going through your mind, and you basically reevaluate them, and you ask if they are true. Is this thought actually true? When we are thinking thoughts, when we have, particularly if they're negative, we tend to buy into them. We tend to think they're real, that they reflect reality in a trustworthy way. And it's not only that, we don't even tell ourselves that. We don't say, this thought reflects this thought reflects reality in a trustworthy way, and it's, I can trust in this thought to tell me what is true about me and my life and the people around me and whatever. Well, we don't even do that. We immediately just buy into our thoughts. There's no filter, right? So basically, what has been discovered to be the helpful part about cognitive therapy is not changing the content of our thoughts, because that's what you do in cognitive therapy after objectively evaluating sort of the truthfulness of a thought, the accuracy of it. You sort of try and change it. Interestingly, people who've researched this new approach have found that it's not it's not changing the content of our thoughts that is the powerful bit. It's actually just the observing it. It's the seeing the thought and not being the thought, not believing the thought. It is seeing the thought. This is called decentering. And when you decenter enough from your thoughts, I mean, listen, as a meditator, I can tell you there are many levels to decentering. And that's actually one of the main things we do in meditation. But decentering basically helps you see that your thoughts are not core aspects of you. They do not reflect reality accurately, and you do not have to believe in them. You don't have to buy into them. Now, this approach that I'm talking about is called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and it is now, I know in my country, even though I don't live in there anymore, it's a recommended treatment for people with repeated bouts of depression, for people who relapse into depression often. And it's because of decentering. It's because we see that our thoughts are not those things I said. It creates a lot of space between who we are and our thoughts. It creates separation between the awareness of our thoughts and our thoughts themselves. And we begin to identify more with the awareness of our thought rather than the thoughts themselves. And listen, I can tell you right now, as somebody who's suffered with depression before, and as just a human being, as a meditator, as a decade-long meditator, I can tell you that detaching from your thoughts is so powerful, not just for depressed people, but for everyone. There's so many studies done on the power of meditation, and particularly in the specific mechanisms behind what happens when we detach from our thinking deliberately, and the kind of the neurological markers of that, and sort of the psychological effects of that. There's so much evidence for it. And there is so much I like about this method. There is so much I like that I do not like about our standard ways of treating people with depression. One of them is that to do this, you have to do it. You cannot just take a tablet. Yes, you have to practice you practice meditation, basically. You practice specific meditation techniques. That's what you do to help you decenter from your thinking. And now, well, listen, all meditation, you can kind of think that all meditation does that to some extent. Some do it more directly than others. But anyway, we won't go into the exact details. But what I love about this is you have to do it. A doctor can't meditate for you. That's absurd. They can't. They can't sit there for you and do your meditation. That is not how meditation works. You have to do it. And because of that, you develop skills. You're developing a set of skills. You're developing a tool. You're learning a tool that you can use for the rest of your life. And it's a powerful tool. It's a clinically proven tool. And it's no medication is required. I'm not saying that you necessarily wouldn't want some medication just to help you along as you learn this tool. But there's no medication involved. It's not a genetic explanation. It's not a neurological explanation. Of course, there will be a neurological foundation or correlate or, the neurological side of this, but it's not, that's not how we explain it. We explain it as a dysfunction in our own mind, of our own habits. It gives you your power back. It's someone saying, it's not your destiny. This is because your thinking patterns are messed up, right? I'm not saying this is the only explanation, but I'm just saying it is a very empowering explanation. And it actually shows the patient what is wrong with them in a very direct way. If you, I can tell you right now, when you start to see your mind, especially when you're having bad days or bad months or whatever, especially when you're having a depressive episode, your mind is extraordinarily negative and repetitive and almost boringly so. Oh man, it is so tiring. It is just, it's powerful, and it just goes round and round in circles, and oh man, it is a recipe for disaster, recipe for depression. So that's one other thing we can take into account, giving people tools like meditation to help them decenter from their thoughts, which has proven to be extremely powerful. As effective as medication, I will add. Let's see. We've spoken about diet. We have spoken about exercise. We've spoken about basic lifestyle factors. We have spoken about social life. Another thing along that way is, asking people about their intimate relationships. For one thing, do they have any intimate relationships? Are they married? Do they have a long-term partner or not? If they do, is their situation with their partner, are they stagnating in that relationship? Is it even negative? Is it a negative factor in their lives? What's going on there? I think that's a really important thing to take into account, along with many other things. Another important factor to take into account in a more holistic understanding of depression is job and career, and even going further, purpose. So, listen, a lot of us spend 40 hours a week working, sometimes even more, and if you include the commute, it could be, 50, 60 hours. So, we have to think very carefully. If we're doing something 50, 60 hours a week, that a lot of our psychology, a lot of our habits, a lot of our how we feel about our life is going to be dictated by that. I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen it myself, and I've seen it in other people. I've seen it in adults who are way older than me who've spent years doing something they don't like. And I'm not saying this is the only reason, but they feel very whole, and getting up in the morning is a struggle for them, and going to work is a struggle for them, and doing everything at work for 8 hours is a struggle. I mean, that is kind of that sounds like a depression to me. It sounds like how a depressed person would behave. It's another factor we must take into account. Because I can tell you from my own experience, as I've said, that when you spend your life doing things you don't like doing, I mean, how can you be happy? How can you possibly be happy on a consistent basis when you spend most of your time doing work that doesn't feel meaningful to you, that you resent, you have a boss that you don't like, you have colleagues you don't like, you don't trust, you don't believe in the company, you don't believe in what they're doing, you don't believe in their values and their culture and so on. How that affects you, it affects you. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And going further than that, it's not just about work or career. Often we make this very firm distinction between work and the rest of our lives, or work and our purpose in life, or having a job and not having a job, or having a job or being retired. And I just, as someone who's self-employed and who's gone through a lot of twists and turns in my career, I just don't believe in that distinction as other people do. It helps that I've never had a full-time job, as in being, like, I've never been a full-time employee in any company at all. So that obviously influences my opinion. But I think it gives me a certain opinion that a lot of people won't have. What I think we can say is that basically we all dedicate our time to something, right? Every single person alive on the planet, whether they're elderly or retired or on a pension, or maybe they're like a toddler or a child who doesn't even go to school yet, or like a teenager who goes to school but then comes home and does whatever, or an adult who has a job and they work 40 hours a week and everything. We all put our time towards things, right? Let's just forget the distinction between work and everything else. Let's just say, what is our time being put towards, right? If we are putting our time towards things that we don't like doing, that don't make us feel good, and that aren't aligned with our values, they aren't aligned with our visions for who we want to be and what we can do in this world, they aren't aligned with our dreams and our ambitions in life. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have a job, it doesn't matter if you're retired or not, it doesn't matter if you're a child. How are you going to feel most of the time? You're not going to feel very good. Like, it's going to catch up with you, it's going to affect you. And so what I think, and we'll get to this, actually, I'll leave that for now. I'll get to my solution for that in a minute, but there's something we need to look at there as well. You know, where is our time going? As a very sort of big picture, high level question, we need to look at that, as, in my opinion. Without a strong sense of knowing where our time is going, or knowing that it's going to something meaningful to us, I think that is a strong factor in how we feel and our mood. And persistent, well, listen, depression is the number one cause of people being laid off work, right? So you go figure right there. So listen, those are some factors I've talked about there. And listen, there are so many I could talk about. I just don't want to talk for hours and hours and hours here. You know, we've spoken about family, we've spoken about friends, we've spoken about close relationships, we've spoken about alcohol, food, and exercise, well, diet more generally. We've spoken about our job, we've spoken about our psychology, we've spoken about our work or our purpose in life. And listen, I feel like I've not even scratched the surface here. I just want to say that we're talking about holistic understanding. This is a problem when you talk about holistic understanding. Everything is potentially on the table, right? So I could talk about where you live. I could talk about I could talk about the things that have happened to you in your life. I could talk about past addictions. I could talk about what you do on the weekends. I could talk about how do you view yourself, you know, self-image. I could talk about the relationship you had with your parents 20, 30 years ago. I could talk about your mental patterns. I could talk about like so many things. Like, there's really no, obviously we don't want to go into like ridiculous fine detail, like what's the color of your bike. Like, that's going to have a huge impact on your mood and on whether you're going to have depression or not. No, I'm saying there are so many factors that if I just say, right, if I just cover 5 of them, it seems like those are the most important. I'm not saying that. I've given you a selection, right? You can, if you're struggling with depression, or if you're, you know someone and you're trying to understand why, you look at the entire person's life or your own life and you say, what are the possible factors here? And you have to trust your instinct here. A doctor's not going to ask you these things, but it doesn't mean because they have the medication that they know. What do they know about your life? What do they know? You know, even if I sit and do therapy with you for 10 hours, 20 hours, I'm not a therapist either. I am a mindfulness teacher, but, you know, let's say we were to talk about your life for 10, 20 hours. I would know a lot, but come on, I don't know. Like, there's so much. I've not scratched the surface here, right? So you have to look at your own life, and you also have to educate yourself about psychology, about biology, about like everything. If you want to have a full understanding of depression, you've got to be very well educated about it. There's so many things I could talk about here. I don't want to. What I want to talk about is quickly here is a sort of big picture idea for how we should treat depression, right? What I think we need is we need people who are depression specialists, but they are depression specialists that take into account as many factors as possible, right? So you might go to see a depression specialist and they might give you medication. They might give you medication, right? Because medication is proven to have an effect, to help. But that's not the only thing. They're going to sit down with you. They're going to talk to you. They're going to understand. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to look at everything. They're going to look at all these factors that I've mentioned in this podcast. And they're going to know what sort of how do we fine tune all of these different variables so that we are maximizing the possibility that you're going to recover from your depression and you're not going to be stuck in depression again. They're going to give you tools like meditation, like diet, like proper exercise, like good routines, good habits, they're going to help you reshape how you live your daily life. They might even help you change career. They might even help you move to a different place if the place you're living in is making you miserable or is contributing. They're going to help you improve your relationship. They're going to give you tools for that. They're going to, if you don't have romantic, intimate relationship, maybe that's a factor. Maybe you need to go out and meet someone. You don't need a fucking pill. You need to go out and meet someone, perhaps, right? I mean, listen, only the patient knows their life, right? The patient knows their life and they know what their life is about. The person treating them doesn't really know. They have to find out as much as possible, and they have to, with their expertise on depression, they need to suggest treatment plans that address all the issues, or at least try and fine tune the issues as much as they can and as much as the patient is willing to take on. I don't want to give a prescriptive list, because I don't claim to know a person's life and I don't claim to know all the factors behind depression. I'm not going to pretend I know. What I do know is that there's many more factors than we typically associate with this or typically take into account, and that we need to think about each of them very carefully. Let me talk about my example, right? My depressive episode, right? Here, let me just reel off some of the main factors that I think were behind my depression. For one thing, it was the immediate circumstances of my life at the time. I was working full-time in McDonald's, a job that I did not like at all. And I was working a lot of hours at the time because it was the holidays from university, right? Just around the time I was in my sort of worst period of depression, right? I'd also just been broken up with by someone who I was very attached to, almost to an unhealthy degree. And I'll mention, I have a history of that. I've gotten over it now, 10 years later, but I have a history of being very attached to people and not taking it very well when I realise they're not into it as much as I am. No, did anyone ask me about that? No. Did anyone help me solve that? No. Right? So, go figure. I was basically grieving. I was in a grievance. I was grieving, and I was seeing the person that I was grieving for every day, 5 days a week. No one explained that grieving is a process. No one explained the stages involved. No one explained what to expect, what to do. No one explained that maybe seeing this person 5 days a week isn't a good idea, Ross. Maybe you should somehow find a way to not see them. I don't know. That is a factor. My diet, my diet, it's strange to say this because now I like extraordinarily healthily, more healthily than 99% of people I know. But my diet, it seems strange to say it now, but my diet then was, wow, for one thing, I used to have a McDonald's every time I was working. So if I was working 4 or 5 days a week, 4 or 5 McDonald's a week. Yes. I used to drink at that time, well, before that, I have a bit of an alcohol tendency. Probably some unresolved psychological issues there. No one said that, that was never brought up to me. What else? Exercise, more or less, but not as like a regular part of my life and not something I took very seriously. My diet was not good. I drank way too much alcohol, and that is an indicator of something else, in my opinion. It's not just an outright factor on its own, but did that ever get taken into account? No, we must take that into account. That was one of the main factors, in my opinion. And listen, the other main factor for me is that, well, listen, let me say something I said last week, that as soon as I was told I had depression, I started getting given tablets. I felt ill. I felt worse because I'd been told I had depression, and I actually started acting more depressed. And I started, in my opinion, basically, I don't know how to explain this or to describe it. It's kind of like when you have a little cough, you look up this, what is a cough a symptom of? What sort of, viruses or whatever is it a symptom of? All of a sudden you read all these other symptoms and you start like, oh shit, I feel tired. And oh shit, oh wait, my throat is a bit tickly actually. It might have nothing to do with the virus. You're just focusing on the stuff that you read, right? That's what happened to me with depression, because I heard about all the stuff that depressed people go through, and basically I don't want to say 100% started creating it myself, but I started focusing so much on these little things, and it just becomes a cycle. You see it, and then you're like, oh, I'm depressed, and then for some reason the next time it's more intense, and then it just becomes this loop, and it just gets worse and worse. That's one thing that we need to take into account, in my opinion. And I said this last week, that when people get diagnosed with something, they basically get worse because they start acting according to how they think they should act, given the diagnosis they have. But that's a whole other discussion. Talked a bit about that last week. And the other factor for me is that I actually had previous signs of depression. I had some episodes in my teenage years. I wouldn't say I was depressed to the point that I needed professional help, but I was struggling a lot of the time. And my life on the outside looked pretty good, but I can tell you right now, I did not feel good a lot of the time, and a lot of my friends didn't share that. It wasn't just like, it was a bit beyond just teenage mood swings, in my opinion. And perhaps there were installed a lot of negative mental habits. As I said, depressed people they have much worse mental habits, and that's a simplification, but their thinking is much more negative, and they get lost in these cycles of negative thinking that are self-perpetuating. Maybe a lot of the negative cycles that I was in when I was diagnosed with depression were already set in place a little bit earlier on in my life. Goodness me. So listen, my overall message here is we need to take into account, we need to have people that are specialised in depression. I know they're out there, but we can't just get people to see a doctor who gives them fucking medication and that's it. That is just, I don't know what to say. I really don't. I know I might be sounding idealistic. Oh, well, it's cost effective, Ross. So, well, what do you want? Doctors are stressed out. I don't know, but we could give people the understanding earlier on in life and at least tell them about all these other factors so that they feel more empowered. I don't know exactly what the solutions are here. I'm talking quite high level here, and I'm talking to people who are interested in psychology, and perhaps if there's professionals out there listening to this, well, there you go. I mean, let's take into account as many factors as possible, including those that I mentioned here, and let's try and fine-tune them all to lessen people's chances of depression and to stop them relapsing and relapsing and relapsing. Right, I think we're going to leave it there. Thanks a lot, everyone. I really hope that this is helpful, and if you want to share something about your own experience or any opinions you have, please email me, ross@deep-psychology.com. And please do support me on Patreon if you enjoy the show and you want to support me in making it both financially and morally. Moral support right here. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please leave a review. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email me at ross@deep-psychology.com. If you'd like to go deeper, head to deep-psychology.com for articles, courses, ebooks, and one-to-one coaching. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.